It's time for another edition of Ripple Effect, a presentation of the Red River Basin Commission on CFAM Radio 950. And we're joined once again by Chris Adams. He's the project coordinator out of the RRBC's Winnipeg office. And you've been in the role now for a couple of years. And we've had the opportunity to connect, Chris, on a couple of things, specifically some project work that you've been doing with Netley-Libau Marsh. And how about that restoration project and just the latest regarding it?
Netley-Libau Marsh is actually the largest coastal freshwater marsh in North America, and it's located just at the south end of Lake Winnipeg, where the Red River empties into the lake. And this marsh has undergone a major process of degradation over the last 100 years, with more than 10,000 acres of vegetation being lost just between 1979 and 2001. And with this loss of vegetation, we've seen corresponding declines in habitat quality, as well as declines in the marsh's capacity to sequester phosphorus and carbon. So overall, the marsh has shifted to a state that is more like a shallow, muddy lake than the thriving marsh that it once was. And the Netley-Libau Marsh Restoration Project is an interdisciplinary partnership between a variety of different organizations with input from the University of Manitoba, government and private sector stakeholders, as well as Indigenous groups, which all share goals of restoring the marsh and bringing back some of what existed historically.
Now, we spoke about a year ago about this particular project, and you shared some pretty exciting things that were on the agenda for summer 2024. Talk about what you were able to accomplish last summer.
When I talked to you last, we talked about basically the plans that we had started working on going back to the fall of 2022. We started throwing this idea around. And last summer, we actually went out there and built these structures that we've been designing over the last couple of years, which have been designed to intercept and slow down the flow of water, trapping sediment, and creating shallow conditions that will be more favorable for plant growth. So there's a whole lot of sediment moving through this area. And basically, the idea is that by trapping it, we can create the shallow conditions that will make it possible for plants to grow in the marsh again. And so these structures are built from 100% biodegradable materials, and they're meant to integrate naturally into the marsh's sedimentary processes, decomposing over time as they become buried in sediment and new vegetation. But before installing the baffles, our partners from Peguis First Nation led us in a ceremony to ensure that our work honored the community's connection to the land and the water in the area. And we had about 15 members of our project group gathered out in the marsh, where an elder from Peguis guided us in this ceremony. So this ceremony was held in June, and then we carried out the construction and maintenance of the baffles throughout July and August. And so with the baffles in place now, the next step is to wait and let them trap sediment over time, making it shallow enough for plants to grow.
Now, it's great that this project literally got into the ground last year in the Netley-Libau Marsh. Obviously, when we're talking a project of this scale and interest, there needs to be some evaluation. So talk about how those baffles are going to be looked at and reviewed over the next couple of seasons.
So we've established a 2-year monitoring program to track the performance of these baffles and evaluate them over that period. So the general idea was inspired by successful examples in other parts of the world, but there still is an experimental aspect to what we're doing here. And it's important that we monitor the baffles to ensure that they're actually doing what they've been designed to do. That is, trap sediment and make it shallow enough for plants to grow. So last year, in addition to building the baffles, we carried out monitoring of baseline conditions in the area. So our partners from the University of Manitoba carried out a LiDAR survey, and that provided us with a really clear picture of the sediment surface prior to the baffles being installed. And similar surveys will be repeated over the upcoming 2 years to measure just how much sediment has been trapped by the baffles. And in a similar way, we documented the baseline extent of vegetation cover using drone surveys at the end of the growing season. So we'll repeat these surveys as well over the upcoming 2 years to track how quickly that vegetation is recovering.
What are your plans for transplanting native bulrushes as well as seeding wild rice?
Yeah, so in addition to just monitoring the baffles over the upcoming season, we decided to carry out some targeted transplanting and seeding activities to try to speed along this restoration project. And part of the idea there is to just diversify the range of different methods that we're trying out so that we can study all of these results and learn what the best methods really are for future restoration on a larger scale. So our partners from Peguis First Nation recommended to us that we attempt to reintroduce wild rice into the marsh. So we will be carrying out some seeding trials in several areas to see if we can actually get it growing there again. And we're also going to be carrying out some transplanting of bulrushes, which are still present in the marsh, but just in lower quantities than they were historically. We'll be doing some transplanting of those to help speed up the recovery of vegetation in the marsh.
Are there research plans involving sediment cores and historical aerial imagery?
Parallel to all of these restoration activities, our partners from the University of Manitoba are carrying out research to try to give us a better understanding of exactly how this marsh has changed over time. So it turns out that there was actually a really good aerial survey carried out for the entirety of Netley-Libau Marsh in 1929. And so there's a great set of overlapping high-resolution photos of the marsh complex from almost a century ago sitting at the National Air Photo Library. And so our plan is to purchase these photos and use them to generate a detailed vegetation map of 1929. And so basically that will allow us to precisely quantify exactly how much vegetation has been lost over nearly a century. And the other area of research here is using sediment cores, which also allow us to look into historical conditions with, deeper layers of sediment representing older sediment layers. And some preliminary research that our project partners have done has shown that carbon sequestration close to 100 years ago was about 3 to 7 times the rate that we see currently in the marsh. And that's because there was so much more vegetation there with carbon in its tissues. And so what we're doing in this upcoming season is we're expanding that sediment core sampling to be a more representative marsh-wide view of how that's changed over time. And we'll be looking not only at carbon, but also at phosphorus. So basically, this will help us understand the capacity of the marsh to improve water quality in Lake Winnipeg, as well as mitigate the effects of climate change. And we're trying to return the marsh to its past state. And so by better understanding what that past state looks like, we'll be able to make better plans about future restoration.
Now, you'll be spending some time on March 19th at the annual Fish Dinner Gala in support of the Red River Basin, and you will be sharing more about this project, I understand.
That's right. I will be giving a longer presentation on this Netley-Libau Marsh Restoration project at the Red River Basin Commission's North Chapter Fish Dinner Fundraiser Gala. And the funds from this gala will go towards hosting educational presentations and events about water protection in the Red River Basin. The gala is next week on Wednesday, March 19th, in recognition of World Water Day. See www.redriverbasincommission.org for more details and to get tickets. It would be great to see you there.
Chris Adams, he's a project coordinator with Red River Basin Commission's Winnipeg office, joining us today for Ripple Effect, again brought to you by the Red River Basin Commission on CFAM Radio 950.